Defying global condemnation, Iraqi Kurds vote to break away from Baghdad, but regional powers seem determined to stop that from happening. I'm Imran Garta, and today's Newsmaker is the fallout from the northern Iraq referendum. For many Iraqi Kurds, this was a vote almost 100 years in the making, and they sent a pretty clear message that they want a state of their own. It's something Kurdish leader Masoud Barzani says his people were promised after World War I, and that no Iraqi government since then has truly governed in their interest. But both Iraq's central government and Turkey called the referendum an illegal and dangerous move in a country that finally has Daesh on the back foot. They warned of repercussions if the region went ahead with the vote, and now those consequences may be unfolding. Turkish and Iraqi forces have amassed on the region's fringes for joint military operations, and Ankara says it's ready to seal the border and may impose economic sanctions. Sandra Gatman has more.
The early results are in. An overwhelming majority of people in northern Iraq's semi-autonomous Kurdish region have voted yes for independence.
We're here celebrating because we made a Kurdish state today. We're Kurdish people. We're not Arab, we're not Persian, we're no one else. We're Kurds and we'll remain Kurds forever.
Baghdad swiftly came out and said it will not recognize the results. But the referendum defied warnings from many other corners of the world. Turkey, the US, and Britain argued the timing of the vote will jeopardize Iraq's security. The U.S.'s State Department says it's deeply disappointed that the Kurdistan Regional Government decided to conduct today a unilateral referendum on independence, including in areas outside of the Iraqi Kurdistan region. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres also condemned it, saying it could have potentially destabilizing effects. The vote may have been a yes or no question on administrative independence, but including the disputed Kirkuk province is controversial. Kirkuk was taken by Kurdish Peshmerga forces in 2014 to drive out Daesh, but Baghdad accuses the KRG of a land grab, and Kirkuk is ethnically mixed, made up of Kurds, Turkmen, and Arabs.
Kirkuk was historically Turkmen, but we coexisted with Kurds, Arabs, and Christians. God forbid that this ethnic project for independence causes tension and conflict.
The province is also oil-rich and an important source of income for the whole of Iraq. During the vote, Iraqi police enforced a curfew, saying it was to keep the peace. But there are fears Baghdad may try to take back Kirkuk by force. As for the KRG's next course of action, immediate independence won't happen anytime soon. Kurdish leader Masoud Barzani says the yes result is a mandate to negotiate better terms from Baghdad.
We are ready to give it as much time as needed, 1 year, 2 years, and if we see constructive dialogue with Baghdad, we can give it more time too. But I want to underline that we are never going to renegotiate the failed partnership that we had in the past.
Kuzey Irak yönetiminin yanında oldu. Ancak bizim aynı zamanda Irak'ta Arap kardeşlerimiz de var. Türkmen kardeşlerimiz var. Ezidiler, Keldaniler, Süryaniler, onlar da var. Sadece bir şahsın veya aşiretinin hayat alanı değildir. Bunun böyle bilinmesi lazım.
While the KRG denied the referendum would stoke tensions, the region is already responding. Turkey and Iraq are holding joint military drills near a border crossing into northern Iraq. Ankara fears the vote will provoke further separatist ambitions. President Erdogan has also warned that Turkey may cut off access to a pipeline, which the KRG depends on to sell hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil a day to the rest of the world. The KRG got the result it wanted, a symbolic win after decades of struggle. But is Iraq's Kurdish leadership prepared to face what may come next? Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
I'm joined now by Selim Atalay. He's a journalist and commentator for Turkish news channel 24 TV here in Istanbul. In Erbil, we have Peter Galbraith. He's a former U.S. ambassador and author of the book The End of Iraq. And in Madrid, Ibrahim Al-Marashi. He's an Iraq analyst and author of The Modern History of Iraq. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Peter Galbraith, let me begin with you. I know you support this referendum. You support the bid for independence. Doesn't it matter that Baghdad and all the big countries in the region surrounding northern Iraq are against this referendum? They won't recognize it, they haven't recognized it, and they will do anything in their power to stop the repercussions of it. Doesn't it matter?
Of course it matters, but it doesn't change the situation, which is that in what every observer has said was a free and fair vote of the people in the Kurdistan region. They voted overwhelmingly, my guess is more than 90%, to establish an independent state. And in the 21st century, since 1991, we've had 28 new countries created, all of them as secessions from existing countries, many of them through referendum. And international law has evolved to the point where, and indeed this is in the UN Charter expressing the right of self-determination of peoples, other treaties, that there is a right of self-determination that's now been exercised. So, and Kurdistan already is a sovereign state. There's no Iraqi presence here in Kurdistan. It has its own army, controls its own borders, it has its own government. Iraqi law doesn't apply here. So it's not a very big step from what exists now to full independence. When other countries broke up, for example, Yugoslavia, and I was the first U.S. ambassador to Croatia, the entire international community tried to keep Yugoslavia together. They condemned Slovenia and Croatia for moving for independence. And within 6 months, Croatia and Slovenia were internationally recognized within 9 months of their declaration
Fair
of
enough,
independence.
But that also caused the death of hundreds
Nations.
of thousands of people. That also caused the death of hundreds of thousands of people. That's what the neighbors are warning about. They're saying the region's already a mess, it's chaotic. Do you want to have a repeat of what happened when Yugoslavia broke up because hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives?
Well, that's a good point, but it was not possible to hold Yugoslavia together. What was possible was to avoid the war, and that ought to be the situation today. Incidentally, Iraq's been around for 100 years, and I don't think anybody would argue that it's been a very stable nation. Its existence has involved the deaths of millions of people, including hundreds of thousands of Kurds in a genocide in the 1980s. So, from the Kurdish point of view, staying in Iraq is a formula for staying in a country that they feel has failed them, and that poses a risk to their very existence.
Okay.
So this is, yes, it's a move for a 100-year-old dream for independence, but it's also very much a rejection of Iraqi history.
Selim Atalay, they have a right. Let them decide and let them break away if they want to.
Well, with all due respect, Mr. Ambassador is just tailoring whatever he thinks is fair and lawful. First of all, just minutes ago, Turkish Foreign Minister was on 24 TV, channel 24, my TV network, and he said, first of all, he called Kurds as brothers, and he said, we have done everything for our Kurdish brothers for their success in Erbil and elsewhere. Now, this decision, this unilateral and illegal decision, is provocative, inflammatory, is very dangerous. And Mr. Ambassador, with all due respect, yes, he was in Croatia, and he was a hero in Croatia, so-and-so in Timor maybe, but not so in Afghanistan, and now he's back to Kurdistan, as we know. Mr. Ambassador, I'm smelling oil. Your presence there indicates there's an oil aspect going on.
I don't want to get ad hominem with Peter Galbraith here, and I've addressed it with him in an interview in the past, right? He's made money from oil deals in northern Iraq. I've addressed it before, but we're talking about the vote here. Let's not get ad hominem with each other and compare our CVs here. Ibrahim Al-Marashi, Do you think that the Kurds of northern Iraq have a right to decide their future in this vote at this time?
I'll divide your comment. So, do the Kurds have the right to decide their future? Yes. At this time, the timing couldn't have been worse. ISIS is still not defeated in Iraq. It still has a presence there, and a potential disagreement between the KRG and Baghdad has hurt the fight against ISIS in the past. Further acrimony will only inhibit and impede a common campaign to rid Iraq of ISIS.
Peter Galbraith, there's a fight against ISIS right now, or Daesh, as is commonly known in the region. They're finally on the back foot. Why take your eye off the ball with this problem right now? Isn't that a reasonable argument, Peter?
Well, it may be a reasonable argument. I want to address one point. There's nothing in the Iraqi constitution that prohibits Kurdistan from conducting a referendum. The constitution is very clear on the powers of the federal government. Those powers do not include elections. Therefore, under the constitution, they fall under the power of the regions. And anybody can read Article 110 and 115 to see that that's very clear. With regard to ISIS, the Kurdistan government has made clear that the Peshmerga will continue their campaign against ISIS. I think it's very important to understand that in 2014, the Iraqi army behaved like cowards. There were 30,000 of them in Mosul. They were attacked by maybe 2,000, maybe just 1,000 terrorists with pickup trucks. They ran away. In Kirkuk, it's not true that the Peshmerga came and took it over. The Iraqis abandoned it. For 36 hours before, they told the governor, we're going to stay in Kirkuk, and then they just disappeared. And it was only because the Peshmerga were already there that Daesh didn't take Kirkuk.
Okay, so let's ask Ibrahim.
I mean, I think it's one needs to give a fair rendering of the history.
Okay, so let's take that. Ibrahim, they feel they were undervalued in the fight against Daesh. They feel they did all the heavy lifting as the Peshmerga, and they will continue to do it, whether they have an independent country or not, but they prefer to have an independent country. Address that claim, Ibrahim.
First of all, I wouldn't say the Iraqi army, the soldiers, the military collapsed, but I still wouldn't call it in a blanket term they were cowards. A good number of the Iraqi soldiers were captured, they were massacred on site. The Iraqi military was run by a corrupt political system, and that's why they collapsed. So I think we have to make that distinction. The Peshmerga fought valiantly. The Iraqi army was able to reconstitute itself and to fight back. But what we've seen against in the fight against ISIS is it doesn't seem one actor can do it alone. There needs to be cooperation. I would say Mosul fell because the KRG had sent intelligence to the central government of Baghdad. Baghdad didn't act upon that. What this is saying that at this time, cooperation will be more effective in rooting out ISIS rather than having a vote against, rather than having a vote for independence will kind of be a wedge in between all these players when they need to cooperate.
Let's have a little listen to Masoud Barzani and look at some of the thinking behind why they feel that this is the time for them. Let's have a listen to Masoud Barzani.
For freedom, we are ready to pay any price. We are at a junction in the road, either to choose independence or subordination and oppression.
So there's a binary there, Salim.
Yes.
It's independence or it's oppression. Tell me why you disagree with that.
Okay, there used to be a Federal Republic of Iraq, and which had a proper constitution, which one of the parties here have also contributed. And now the founding father of the Iraqi constitution and the federal government is now celebrating its dismemberment. I don't know how we came from that point to this point. Now, calling it the Republic of Iraq or Iraqi government as defunct is requires a little more than legality, the current situation. De facto votes within the same family are okay, are always very debatable. How much free speech was there? How much of a free voting took place? And I'm hoping we can also have time to discuss whether Kirkuk should really be included in this referendum.
So let's bring in Kirkuk. Ömer Çelik, the Turkish EU minister, saying if Barzani insists having a freedom after the results, every weapon that has been given to the Peshmerga can be used against the Turkmen, the Arabs, and other minorities of Iraq. There's that fear with regards Kirkuk, which is ethnically diverse, right? Tell me why Turkey doesn't trust the KRG when it comes to Kirkuk.
Okay, recent history. The population of Kirkuk first cleansed and dismantled and repopulated. And during this process, we never could track properly the population, and there was no, as far as I know, there was no official census. There were no condition for a census also. But the track record shows that the population of Kirkuk is being artificially ballooned by the import of others from the neighborhood. And Turkmens have been complaining about this. Official records are systematically being destroyed, so there's no way to keep track of it. Iraqi conditions are obvious, and there's always that grab the oil, grab Kirkuk theme in the background. So that has been the constant theme.
Okay, Peter Galbraith, the rights of the Arab and Turkmen people in a place like Kirkuk, are they now under threat?
Of course, any settlement of Kirkuk has to take into account the rights of the Arab and Turkmen communities. And to the extent that where they are in geographically defined areas and they don't wish to be part of Kurdistan, then in the process of negotiating the border, they should not be part of Kurdistan. President Barzani has written in the Washington Post that he only wants to include in the new state of Kurdistan people who overwhelmingly want to be part of Kurdistan. I think that's a very sensible approach because you know, why would you want to import trouble into your new country?
But then, Mr. Ambassador, why were the disputed, sorry to interrupt you, sir, my apologies, why then were the disputed provinces included in the referendum? Kirkuk, Nineveh, Diyala, these were disputed. Baghdad claims them as well. If this is going to be a problem down the line, why were they included? Was that a mistake at least?
Well, they were very clear that the people voting were not voting on the status of that territory. So it is not settling whether that territory is part of Kurdistan or not. The Iraqi Constitution, Article 140, has a procedure. It says there should be a census, followed by you know, having the people who were brought in by Saddam leave if they choose voluntarily, and then redrawing the boundaries to deal with the fact that they were altered by Saddam to make it less Kurdish, and then to have a referendum. The Iraqi government did none of those things. The deadline was December 31st, 2007. We're you know, almost to the end of 2017, 10 years. So, and this is one of many articles of the Constitution that the Kurds say were not honored by the federal government. So to the extent that they made a bargain to join a federal republic, that republic never came into being. And, and it's hard to blame Masoud Barzani as one of the fathers of it for having you know, now seen that the Constitution didn't work, and he doesn't believe it will ever work. He doesn't believe there's any intention to make it work.
Yes, and Baghdad disputes that on legal and political grounds. Let me ask Ibrahim, when you hear Haider al-Abadi saying we will take force if necessary, when you hear President Erdogan saying, you know, we could come suddenly one night after this, you know, where they're going to get the oil, we could sort of adjust the tap, we can close the tap and then it's done. When you hear that sort of talk from those who oppose the vote, what do you think is going to happen in the coming weeks and months? Is it going to end well, Ibrahim?
Let me say, in terms of, I'll keep, let's look at Abadi. And why, as Ambassador Galbraith has said, why has this Article 140 on Kirkuk been kicked down the line. And it might be we're seeing an inadvertent acknowledgement of somewhat of the success of Iraqi democracy. Simply, the Iraqi Arab politicians, people like Abadi, never had any political incentive to go ahead with Article 140. It just simply didn't get them enough votes. And if we look at the bellicose language of Abadi, again, he is somebody who's elected. In terms, he's talking to his base. And I think that's the problem. There's no incentive for dialogue between Erbil and Baghdad. As the politicians, none of it will appeal to their base. And I think that's what's lacking. Now, what the point President Erdogan made, yes, it's true. How will a KRG be viable if it doesn't have any outlet to get its oil onto the international market?
Existentially, Salim.
Yes.
Is there the view from Turkey that this is going to trigger a domino effect or contagion? And if the civil war in the southeast was bad, it's going to get worse. Is that the fear?
Okay, Southeast civil war, war against terror. Let's keep in mind that there are also Kurds who are Turkish citizens and who are quite happy with
Certainly, but is that going to get worse? Is that at the root of the Turkish fear?
There's no fear. There's no Turkish fear. Turks don't fear. Turks plan, watch, and then implement.
What are they going to implement?
What they're going to implement is, there's a talk about a 100-year-old dream. Turks have a 600-year-old track record. It's a given process. If you bring out the Sykes-Picot and if you bring out the 100-year-old stories, then Turks have Misak-ı Milli map, which is the national the pact map, which surpasses everything. So if you're playing a de facto game and then playing law on top of that, then if the de facto is going to solve the situation, first then we'll look at the de facto situation, handle the de facto situation, and then, as explained, it's very easy to find some legal aspect and some legal excuse to that. But de facto situation is under Turkey's initiative.
Peter Galbraith, very finally, do you fear war raging in northern Iraq in the immediate aftermath of this vote?
No, and in fact, the election went off very peacefully. The truth is, I served in the Balkans, and this was always a brewing ground of trouble and conflict, but it isn't anymore. Why? Because although the term is pejorative, it's balkanized. Everybody in the region now has their own state. My advice to viewers in Turkey would be to calm down. The Kurdistan regional government has been the best of Turkey's neighbors. They have very much appreciated the role that Turkey has played. Turkey is by far the largest investor here. Turkey has treated them as if they were an independent state. The Turkish Prime Minister and Foreign Minister have come here without bothering to consult Baghdad. Turkey sent troops here with the permission of the KRG over the objection of Baghdad. It's been a terrific relationship, both for Turkey and for the Kurdistan. And my guess is that after the huffing and puffing, that the relationship will continue to be extremely good because, in fact, they have common goals. They're both states that are Western-oriented, democratic, non-Islamist, and also both are bulwarks against Iran. What dominates in Iraq is Iran, and particularly the most effective, most numerous of the Iraqi forces, which is the Hashd al-Shabi, the Popular Mobilization Forces, which are created and commanded by Qasem Soleiman, the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard.
But
so,
here you're finding...
this is not a future that's of interest to Turkey.
Yeah, but here you're finding the Iranians on side with everybody else, barring Israel, I guess, when it comes to opposing this referendum. Interesting times indeed. I wish we could go on, but I have to wrap and I have to move on. Peter Galbraith, Salim Atalay, and Ibrahim Al-Marashi, I thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers. Still ahead, a refugee crisis in Canada. Thousands travel over the border, fearing deportation from the US. How will Prime Minister Justin Trudeau respond? And what really happened 3 years ago when 43 Mexican students vanished? A new investigation pulls the official account apart. Welcome back to the Newsmakers. Canada has proudly resettled more than 40,000 Syrian refugees. But now the country is receiving an influx it wasn't prepared for. Thousands of people, many from earthquake-ravaged Haiti, are crossing the US border to seek asylum. And they're coming at an increasingly rapid pace, with almost 200 arriving each day. They'd been living legally in the US, but fled fearing the end of their protected status. But as Vanessa Keneally explains, Canada may not be the safe haven they were hoping for.
He strutted into power 2 years ago, keen to show he wanted diversity and equality in his cabinet.
A cabinet that looks like Canada.
And in his country.
Mr. Justin J.P. Trudeau.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau won the hearts of many.
He's the most handsome man I've ever laid eyes on.
But not everyone is smitten, especially when it comes to the issue of immigration.
Our system now is in shambles, and I think a lot of this has to do with the messaging, the inconsistent messaging that has been coming out of Justin Trudeau's personal communication shop.
While Trudeau's welcoming of Syrian refugees has made headlines around the world, some are angry that this open-door attitude doesn't match reality, encouraging an influx of Haitian immigrants crossing the border from the US.
But to all of our friends in Little Haiti, your day of justice is coming, believe me.
60,000 Haitians were promised temporary protection in the US after the 2010 earthquake. But that promise runs out in January, and they have started making alternative plans. More than 7,500 people have entered Canada since June, forcing Trudeau to tone down his welcome message and set up a special task force.
Canada is an open and welcoming society because Canadians have confidence in our immigration system and have confidence that we are a country based on laws.
The Prime Minister was seen as building on a legacy of previous leaders who've welcomed immigrants to Canadian shores. People from more than 190 nations arrived last year, mainly from the Philippines, India, China, Iran and Pakistan. Syria also made the top 10 list for the very first time in 2016 after its war intensified. But Trudeau's critics in Parliament say most asylum seekers could be left in limbo for up to 10 years because of a bureaucratic backlog. And even then, they could be deported if they don't make the cut. So is the Canadian Prime Minister sending mixed messages to immigrants, or can he actually sustain the growing number of people wanting a future in the Great White North? Vanessa Keneally, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from Toronto by Chris Alexander. He's a former Canadian immigration minister who served under Prime Minister Stephen Harper. We also have Desmond Cole. He's a journalist and activist in Toronto. And in Geneva, Joel Millman. He's the senior press officer at the International Organization for Migration. Gentlemen, thank you all for joining us. Let me start with you, Desmond. When it comes to immigration, particularly with regards these thousands of Haitians right now who are trying to make Canada their home, is Brand Trudeau at odds with the actions of Prime Minister Trudeau?
Absolutely, Imran. I think that what Justin Trudeau is selling around the world is a branding exercise about Canada's openness that doesn't match with reality. And I would hasten to add that Canada is no different from the rest of the white European so-called developed world, which does not want immigrants from Africa and the African diaspora to stay permanently in its country. Canada, like the United States, had offered some temporary asylum to Haitians after their 2004 political crisis and after the 2010 earthquake. But just like the United States, Canada doesn't want Haitians to stay. We bring immigrants here, we've seen from Syria and from many other parts of the world, and we immediately give them status so they don't have to worry about their future. But for African refugees and for the African diaspora, including Haiti, the stay is always temporary. And Trudeau told people that this was the place to come to safety. And now we see that Haitians are subject to deportation again under the Trudeau government. Even under the Harper government, deportations to Haiti were temporarily halted, and I can't imagine why anyone would be wanting to send people at this current time with all the turmoil in Haiti to go back there.
I'm interested to hear what Chris Alexander thinks of this, because Chris, I know you're no big fan of Justin Trudeau, but is that fair coming from Desmond that the Haitians are at the bottom of the ladder because they are perhaps perceived as being of African descent? Is that the reason?
I have to respectfully disagree with Desmond. Over my time as minister and our time in government, the fastest growing source of immigration to Canada was Africa, were African countries. And they were coming mostly through economic streams on the basis of the point system that applies to everyone who wants to come here. They were also coming as refugees, and they were the largest stream of resettled refugees until the Iraqi and Syrian wars boosted the numbers from those countries because of the very large populations suddenly in need of help there. In terms of Haiti, we are the largest diaspora of Haitians in the world, between 150 and 200,000, mostly in Montreal. We've had a Governor General who was born in Haiti. We have very talented people across the board whose roots are in Haiti. Denis Laferrière is a member of the Académie Française. No other Canadian has ever achieved that. And yes, we gave a helping hand after the crisis in 2004, political crisis that forced Aristide to leave. We did it again, extended it in 2010. But our priority as a government, and I think to be fair, the Trudeau government's priority has been to help the Haitians who are here temporarily to transition to permanent residence, and we've seen thousands of those of them do so. I think it's only fair that we should open our doors, as we have been, to Haitians coming from the United States, where a government and a president are not upholding their humanitarian or immigration traditions and principles. But we should do it in an organized, competent way, not the way that this government has been handling it. We should let people come across the border at our entry points safely, and we should deal with their cases rapidly. That was happening under our government, but we've seen gross incompetence on the part of this government.
Okay, Joel Millman, I have to go to Twitter to a tweet from the Prime Minister's office from March 16th, 2017. The political context is when Donald Trump announces his Muslim ban. You have, regardless of who you are or where you come from, there's always a place for you in Canada. This is from the Twitter handle Canadian PM. These Haitians go, okay, we fear our status in America, our protector status. They cross the border, they go to Canada. Canada says, no, we don't really mean all of you all at once. And thousands of them are getting deported. Isn't that a terrible indictment of the current policy of the current government?
I don't know if I'd go so far as to call it a terrible indictment. I think what you're raising are some very important and sort of legalistic problems or issues that arise in migration worldwide. Both Canada and the U.S. are excellent members of the organization that I work for, IOM. They're members in very good standing. They're great donors. They're great resettlers of migrants. We've worked with both of them extensively. What you have in this case is something I guess you would call akin to jurisdiction shopping. Haitians who have TPS, temporary protected status in the United States, don't want to forfeit that, but they're concerned about what happens when the deadline's reached. Legally, they really shouldn't go to another country and try to get a deal that's similar. But politically and in the emotional times that we're in, that seems irresistible for people, especially when you see the kind of fear and the kind of polarization that's going on with the debate in the U.S. We would simply say this has to be managed, as I believe some of the other guests are suggesting as well. And of course, IOM stands ready to assist both these member states in working out some kind of arrangement that pleases all the sides. I don't think it's an indictment. I just do think it's a bump in the road, and someone has to work on that.
Desmond, are many of these Haitians being unfairly duped because, I hate to use this phrase, there seems to be a lot of fake news doing the rounds. Haitians getting these messages via WhatsApp. They're seeing posts on Facebook saying Canada's open, go to Canada. your protected status in America is under threat. Go to Canada, you'll be fine. They go to Canada. Canada says, we don't know where you got that message from. And hey, guess what? We set up camps along the border, so come into our camp. And now you might lose your protected status back in America. So should we maybe not be blaming the Canadian government here, but maybe those middlemen who are maybe, I don't know, siphoning off cash from these poor Haitians who are vulnerable and under threat?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the people who are acting as so-called immigration consultants and taking a lot of money from people to help them come to this country, because they are also part of the problem. But we mentioned off the top, it was the Prime Minister of this country himself who, out of political opportunism, told immigrants to come to this country and told them that they would be welcome here. And I just go back to the issue of deportation. Why would Canada, like Hurricane Irma has just finished ravaging Haiti again. Why at this time would we be allowing our government to deport people to Haiti? That is such a callous and inhumane policy. And as for the orderly nature or the need for an orderly process to have people come across the border, we don't have that right now, in large part because of something called the Safe Third Country Agreement between Canada and the United States. And what this Safe Third Country Agreement, which is a big euphemism, by the way, what it means is that America is considered by Canada to be a safe place for immigrants. So if an immigrant comes from somewhere else and goes to America first, by Canada's laws, you can't just walk up to the Canadian border in an orderly fashion and say, I am not safe in America, I'd like to seek asylum here. The Canadian government has the right to turn you away under the Safe Third Country Act, saying you're already in a safe country. Now, no reasonable person, Imran, would say that the United States is a safe place for immigrants and refugees right now, but that is the stance of our government. And because of that irresponsible stance, people have been sneaking across our border. And when this happens in winter, when people are trying to evade the proper crossings, they lose their hands, they lose their fingers due to frostbite, they risk drowning, they risk all kinds of safety things. This is about the safety of Haitians and others trying to cross the border, and it's not being taken seriously by this government.
Chris, is Canada wrong to deport these people back to Haiti? Would you have done the same when you were in office?
I think Canada is right to offer a pathway to permanent residence for every Haitian who's interested in staying here. And yes, if the humanitarian situation or the political situation is bad in any country, we should not be deporting people there. And by the way, in the vast majority of cases, when people go home, they aren't taken into custody and forced to go to the airport. They leave voluntarily. So I agree with Desmond. We should live up to our humanitarian rhetoric. I also agree with him that we should be suspending the Safe Third Country Agreement. The United States is not meeting its humanitarian obligations. It is not a safe country, certainly for people from 8 banned nationalities, certainly not for the dreamers who are facing disaster in their lives because of the DACA predicament. And across the board, the United States is retrenching after decades of being much more generous to refugees. In 2016, the United States resettled 85,000 refugees. Canada resettled between 55 and 60,000 refugees, and we are 1/9 the size of the United States. I don't think anyone in the IOM, the UNHCR, or anywhere in the refugee advocacy community around the world is happy with US performance at the moment. But if Canada wants to be the poster child for refugee resettlement, for humanitarian principle, we have to live up to that rhetoric, and that means welcoming people safely at our points of entry, and then providing resources to our Immigration and Refugee Board to process those cases in a timely manner. We're supposed to be doing it within 2 months. But the latest figures show that the waiting time will be many years now, perhaps as many as 11 years for some applicants. This government has been asleep at the switch on these issues. When we left office, there were fewer than 10,000 asylum claims in the backlog. Already at the moment, we have 30,000, close to 30,000 in the backlog, and no sign of action on the part of this government to manage the situation. Well, it's not a crisis here if we have a competent government. But this government is creating a crisis by forcing people to make unsafe choices and then leaving them in the lurch when they get here, not meeting our own service standards.
Joel, is Haiti a place, and I don't know how you sort of organize or triage these countries rather when you look at them in terms of safety and failed states and so on, but is Haiti safe enough to send even one refugee or migrant back to if the Canadians feel they don't want to take the person in? Is Haiti a safe country to send people back to?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure that Haiti is the only place you can send somebody back to. If someone comes up to the border and they have legal status, however temporary, in the United States, they could be sent back there. The question is the U.S. safe? Is Haiti safe? Haiti, like the Philippines, like Ireland, like quite a number of historically migrant-sending countries, has a culture. Island countries often have these cultures of sending lots of people regularly around the world, around their region to seek employment and improve their lives. You know, we at IOM believe that all migration should be legal, it should be safe, and it should be secure for everybody, including the destination countries. And we think one way to guarantee that is to make free passage a lot more likely, let people come and leave as they please. You know, most migrants, as the first guest talked about, they don't want migrants to stay. And we agree that most countries around the world definitely want migrants to come for certain reasons, and they also want the option of knowing they're going to leave, but they make that impossible by erecting barriers and make it very difficult to come in and make it very unlikely someone who has come in, even those who've come in legally, will risk the chance of being turned back a second time, so they stay past their expiration date. This is a big problem that can be alleviated somewhat by having more of an open back and forth, as migration had been, say, in my father and grandfather's time. I'm not so sure the question is whether Haiti is safe, but whether or not safe migration is something that countries, and I said earlier, Canada and U.S. are both fine members in good standing of IOM, are ready to work together for that kind of open border and that kind of free transit.
Desmond, would you advise anybody wanting a better life from a country that's gone through hard times, would you advise them to go to Canada right now?
I mean, it's a difficult sell. I feel that thousands have come across the border in the last weeks because of a sense of lack of safety on their own part. And I have to give people like that the benefit of the doubt that they know what it is that they are running away from. But I will say, and I want to qualify the point, Imran, that I made earlier about the African diaspora and how African diasporic people are being treated when they come to this country. We have immigration detention in Canada, and beyond the fact that we have immigration detention, we don't have a limit for how long we keep people in immigration detention. So these are people, like those who've come across the border here, who don't have regular status in Canada, and they are kept in maximum security facilities. If you go to those facilities, you will see that almost all of the men who are being kept under immigration detention, some of them for years, are black men.
Right.
There is a man actually in federal court, as you and I are doing this interview, by the name of Ibrahim Toure from Gambia. Ibrahim Toure has been in immigration detention in Canada for 4.5 years.
Well, and I'm glad you brought it up.
You will not find white European origin
and we're going to look into that.
In our immigration detention system, the way that you find African people in it. And so what I fear
Desmond,
is that when things don't work out in the immigration system, it is people of the African diaspora who are being punished the most harshly by this government. And that has to be recognized, and it has to be something that people take into consideration before they just willy-nilly come to Canada. And I don't want to diminish by saying willy-nilly. I don't think it's a decision taken lightly.
Well understood. Desmond, I got to jump in because I got to move on.
I fear that right now we can't do that.
Desmond, I got to move on. We're tight for time. Chris Alexander, Desmond Cole, and Joel Millman, I thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers.
We want an Attorney General that has the strength to identify those who are responsible, who is not afraid that their post will be taken, who is not scared of someone who is the president, the governor, a senator, a lawmaker.
It's exactly 3 years since 43 student teachers went missing in Mexico, and their relatives are still waiting for answers and justice. The official account of what happened is that police detained the students and handed them over to a drug gang who then killed them and burned their bodies. But a new investigation claims the evidence completely contradicts that. A research agency known as Forensic Architecture has compiled data from the day the students disappeared. They plotted the movements of hundreds of people connected to the scenes of the crime, including Mexican security personnel. The publishers say the tool highlights the inconsistencies in the testimonies provided in court. So does the government's version of events collapse under scrutiny? Well, joining us now from Manchester is political analyst Colin Harding. He's the director of Latinform, a Latin American political consultancy. Colin, good to have you on the Newsmakers. So, 3 years on, many people have almost come to terms with the fact that these young men are probably dead. But the question is, who killed them? And why does it seem as if the official story has so many holes? Why don't we know what happened?
Well, there have been several reports now, all of which cast doubt on the official version. One by a group of Argentine forensic anthropologists who are very well known internationally, one by an independent group of experts appointed by the Organization of American States' human rights body. And they all say that the scientific evidence shows that the version given by the official inquiry, that the bodies were burnt in a rubbish dump in a small town in the Guerrero state, it just wasn't possible. I mean, it couldn't have happened that way. And there have been allegations, including by the human rights people, that the government actually obstructed the investigation. That they blocked access to important witnesses, and they withheld evidence and so on. And there is a suggestion that there's been a cover-up, that justice hasn't been done, and this is why campaigners are still calling for the real truth to come out.
But when the government comes out with a charred bone fragment recovered from the bag that was presumably the bag that they used to sort of toss remains into a river, and there was one positive match to one of the missing students, 20-year-old Alexander Mora Venancio, right? So when you have the DNA of one of them, and that sort of helps corroborate the government story, why shouldn't people take them at their word and say, okay, fair enough?
Well, this is very fragmentary evidence, and of course the other evidence proves that, or demonstrates that there are big holes in the official account. So one little fragment of bone it doesn't really amount to very much as far as people who cast doubt on the official version are concerned. And there have been more than 30,000 disappearances in Mexico in the last few years, and lots of fragments of bone. One of the investigations into the rubbish dump suggested that a number of human remains had been burnt at various times. These other disappeared people perhaps, but there's no evidence linking, they said, there's no evidence linking the fragments that have been found to the students.
When we look at Peña Nieto's government and how they've handled this over the past 3 years, can we categorically say cover-up, or might it just be incompetence? Might they just be bad at trying to figure this out?
Well, there have been suggestions that the government really doesn't have the judicial framework necessary for carrying out this kind of investigation. That there's been too much political interference. There's too much, well, possibly incompetence, as you suggest. There's nothing conclusive about anything here, and I think one of the complaints of the campaigners and the families of the missing students is that there's no conclusive report. The government's own version is by no means conclusive, and nobody's really satisfied with it. The government calls this the historical truth, but there are an awful lot of people outside the government who are not convinced by that.
I wonder what you think about one of the theories put forward by international investigators, that when the students hijacked those buses in order to get to a protest, one of the buses was loaded with heroin. They didn't know this, and this got them embroiled in a sort of crazy standoff with cartels and so on, and that eventually snowballed or created a domino effect leading to their deaths. How plausible do you think that is?
Well, that's one of the theories that's been put forward and hasn't really been properly investigated. Anything to do with drugs in Mexico is certainly plausible in the sense that the drug-related violence in Mexico has been spiraling in recent years, and the state of Guerrero, where these disappearances took place, is one of the epicenters of drug-related violence. The resorts of Acapulco and Puerto Vallarta, for instance, which are big international holiday resorts, are also centers of extreme violence. And Guerrero has always been known as a lawless state, and this is very much the case in recent years. So anything linking this case to drugs is certainly possible. It is possible that the drugs were stashed in the buses, that either the students knew about it or they didn't know about it. In either way, that they became involved in a situation in which they became the victims. But there's nothing conclusive at all. I mean, this is certainly one of the lines of inquiry which really hasn't been pursued very, very closely.
3 years on, given that the government now is not that cooperative because they feel as if, by and large, they've got the story sorted. As you say, they've used the phrase historical truth. Things are so nebulous regarding the story. Are we ever going to get to the bottom of it?
That's a good question. I mean, possibly not. It is not inconceivable that further evidence will emerge, and that perhaps a future government, there is every possibility that the opposition, the left-wing opposition, will win in next year's presidential election, and maybe they will launch another inquiry which will come up with more evidence. But it's very difficult to say at the moment. It is perfectly possible that we'll never really know the truth.
Extraordinary story. When the news broke 3 years ago, it would have been difficult to imagine that we'd be here 3 years on not actually knowing what really happened, because we presumed we'd find out within weeks or, at most months. Colin Harding, it's been good to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. We've got a lot more to show you online. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Do remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Next time, Nigeria plans to crack down on the pro-separatist Biafra movement. Could it lead to an all-out war? Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.